Judas is a well-known name in church and in culture. It was in 2011 when Lady Gaga sent society into a frenzy with her song titled Judas. And when you read the narrative about Judas in the New Testament, there are a couple of nuances to his story that are often overlooked. Jesus often traveled with 12 close followers called apostles. And near the end of his life, one of the apostles, Judas, actually jumps ships and exits this group. So when you read about Judas in Acts chapter 1, Acts is the book that immediately follows the four Gospels. The 11, 12 minus Judas, the 11 apostles are feeling compelled to replace Judas. So they're in prayer and dialogue about finding the right fit for this position. And when they reference Judas, they refer to him as one, someone who was part of our number, and two, someone who shared in this ministry. Listen to that again. Judas was one identified as who was part of our number and shared in our ministry. So my question is, what happened? If Judas was part of their number and shared in their ministry, what happened? I think if we take a close look at the Gospels, we can walk away with a clear understanding of just how Judas fell victim to his vulnerabilities. In Matthew 26, there's a larger narrative that's occurring, and we find Jesus in Bethany. And Bethany was home base for Holy Week. And the text tells us that at Bethany, in this house, a lady named Mary comes to Jesus and his closest followers, and she actually takes a very expensive jar of perfume and she anoints Jesus with it. Well, this causes some chatter among the group, and they're questioning whether this was a good use of this perfume or not, simply because it's very expensive. It actually costs the same amount, about 200 denarii in the first century, which is the same amount that it would require to feed around 5,000 people. So this was expensive. And some people speak up, but what we notice is that when you read this story in the Gospel of John, it's actually Judas who has a problem with this pricey perfume being poured out to anoint Jesus. And what's interesting is that Jesus doesn't see it that way. For him, the math isn't mathing. He actually scolds those who have an issue with this behavior of the woman and her lavishing love on Jesus. Actually, the text in Matthew 26 tells us this. Jesus looked at them and he said, he was aware of the chatter that was going on. So he said, "Why are you bothering this woman? Why are you bothering this woman?" This reminds me of my first full-time ministry. It was a Sunday morning right before everything started. People were still coming in, finding their seats. And it was one of those churches where it had pews, not the chairs, but the pews. And on the back of a pew was a shelf. And there was a Bible and two hymnals. And you had those 2 or 3 shelves on the back of each pew, depending on how large the pew was. So we had an influx at this time of young adults. And before service started one Sunday morning, one of our members comes to me and says, "I want you to know that I had a conversation with the individual on the last row." And she pointed toward this individual. I said, "Okay, what happened?" She said, "Well, I went back there and I saw them slouched down in the pew. And I went back and I saw that their foot was on that shelf. So I told this individual, I simply said, 'We don't sit that way here.'" That bothered me. It bothered me because these young adults, this was, for many of them, this was their first experience with the church world. They didn't know the etiquette. They didn't know how to sit, how not to sit. They didn't know the rhythm or the routine. They didn't know what to expect. So I asked this lady, I said, please tell me that that was not the very first thing that you said to that young adult. In other words, why are you bothering her? Why are you bothering her? Well, it's in this narrative that the story of Judas starts to unfold. So after this moment where Judas has a problem with this perfume, being used to anoint Jesus. The text goes on. This is Matthew 26, verse 14. So then one of the 12, called Judas, he went to the chief priests and he asked them, "What are you willing to give me if I hand Jesus over to you?" And they counted out 30 silver coins. The next sentence. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. Judas became a victim of his own vulnerability. Someone said that each individual can be understood as demonstrating four qualities at any given moment. The details of one's life are demonstrated with this window that has four panes on it. And the first one is what we would call open. This is information that everyone in the room is fully aware of. And another pane would be called hidden. That is information that the individual hides from the rest of the people in the room. Another pane would be what we call a blind spot. This is information that everyone in the room is well aware of except the individual himself. And then the fourth is what we call unknown. That is, in any given circumstance, it's unknown how someone will act, respond, or behave, whether for the good or for the bad. This is an opportunity. This Holy Wednesday is an opportunity for you and for me, those of us who are part of their number, and to share in this ministry. It's an opportunity for you and I to invite God into the unknown possibilities of our lives so that we do not become a victim of our own vulnerability.